Yo, what's good, guys? We are back at it again with another MLB The Show video for you guys, and today I'm finally updating my set 3 infield tier list. So I'm going to go over all of the most competitive options, all of the newer options, and kind of let you know who you guys should be considering running, who makes the team, who doesn't. And yeah, let's get into it. So a little bit of an extended break. Some of that is personal reasons, and some of that is just the content cycle of the game. We get batches of content and then nothing for like 2-3 weeks. So it's just kind of how it's been. So Alex Gordon here, still, more or less what he was when he came out. Jack of all trades, master of none. You can see the contact against righties is pretty good. The fielding in general is pretty good. Like fielding and reaction are pretty good on him. But overall, not an awesome fielder just because he's not super fast. So he's not actually going to play the most insane third base because that is a secondary position for him. So just something to think about. I think he's fine. If you still want to use him, you can still use him. But I think he is kind of dated in relation to a lot of these more top tier options. This Rizzo at second base, kind of similar. He's dated. If you still really enjoy that swing, if you having to hit lefty-lefty constantly against like Randy and John doesn't bother you that much, then Rizzo should be a great option. Otherwise, I'd probably avoid him. Barry Larkin here. I think he's still A tier. He's not like the top tier shortstop. He's not on that par of like a Jeter from seasons past or a Jimmy Rollins, but he's very good at a lot of things. He has about 100 contact, about 100 power, good fielding, good speed. He's just kind of good at everything, not great at anything. So pretty solid card if you want to run him. No complaints from me. Bill Mazeroski always kind of has a janky swing. A newer card here with 125, 110, 90, 81. So the power is a little lackluster, especially when you compare him to guys like Biggio and Jackie, who I think have better swings and just kind of better stats in general, because those guys both have 90-ish speed plus and play just as good, if not better, defense than Bill does. So for that reason, I think it kind of holds him back a little bit. This Bob Gibson you get from the out of position collection. I think he's fine, and if you're on All-Star or if you're a very comfortable Hall of Fame player and you want to make the argument that switch hitting with Babe Ruth's swing at a catcher, which is usually not a position that has great swings available, if you want to make the argument that that's a really good card, then you can. But for me, the contact's just a little bit low. The power isn't that much higher than the contact to really make him super worthwhile running, and I could care less about the defense. Saberhagen, unironically, or maybe ironically, I guess, this is probably the best Saberhagen we've ever gotten, and he's not a pitcher. So 114, 107, 95, 86 there, 104 clutch. Decent fielding, nothing to write home about. He's going to make some errors with fielding like this, but it shouldn't be super frequent. The only thing that sucks about that is he is at a premium defensive position, that being shortstop. This Harper catcher, basically on par with the Bob Gibson, better hitting stats overall, but you're going to have to hit lefty-lefty sometimes. Some people will probably like that Babe Ruth swing more than Bryce Harper swing. It's really just personal preference. For me, I prefer a different team affinity catcher over both of these guys, but they are still decent enough options at their positions, I would say. Buck O'Neil, A tier. Might get a little bit of hate for this one, but it's just because of the archetype he is. I say it a lot in these videos, where this isn't really what I want out of a first baseman. I want a Frank Thomas first baseman that can't field a lick, and has almost maxed out contact and almost maxed out power, and he's just gonna mash, and he's just gonna have a 1600 OPS. That's what I'm looking for. Not really this kind of Freddie Freeman contact hitting defensive archetype of first baseman. If you want to make an argument for the defense and the speed, then you certainly can if you like the archetype more. But for me, I think he'd be better served in left field. But as a first baseman, I think he's fine. Right here, we have Cal Raleigh. In my eyes, he's pretty similar to this Bob. Against one side, he is significantly better with the bat. You can see 105, 124 with 125 clutch. So against righties, hands down, this Cal Raleigh is a better card than that Bob Gibson. With a runner in scoring position, he's hands down a better card than that. But the arguments against are this contact left is pretty brutal. He is a lot slower than Bob. I think like 20 speed. Probably doesn't have the quirks that Bob does, and you can make the argument that his swing isn't as good, but relatively I think they're more or less on the same power level. For me personally, I'd probably prefer the Cal Raleigh. Carson Williams, not super familiar with his swing, but I think he looks really good. This is a brand new card that we got today or yesterday from the time you guys will see this. 111, 103, 106, 106, 112 clutch. Relatively fast, not insanely fast, but relatively fast, and also has basically maxed out fielding at shortstop. If you can get this guy on the O'Neill team with the arm strength, I don't know why it says he doesn't qualify. He should definitely qualify for it. This card looks disgusting. You're looking at 111, 103, and then 121 power, I believe, on both sides with the O'Neill team. On the Cruz team, he looks absolutely gross, but just objectively, base card looks really good. It all depends on how good his swing is. Right now, I'm kind of hedging my bets and saying that it's probably going to be decent, nothing to write home about. But if it turns out he has an astounding swing that's really, really good, this could easily be an S tier card just with the stats. Chuck Nasty, he's going to go in our D tier for DH. So I'm sure some of you guys saw this card and were wondering why it's on the list. I just feel like we should start including DHs in the infield tier list, because when you look at the diamond, that's where they are. And otherwise, DHs kind of get skipped out on in a lot of these tier list videos, and they just kind of pop up in like the top 50, or if I do a best cards at each position. So the way I'm doing it is, I think if an outfielder's poor enough defensively to justify being ran as a DH, or if there are some of these primary infielders, like, where is he at? I'm looking for Jake Arrieta. I'm not seeing Jake Arrieta, but Jake Arrieta, for example, or like Syndergaard. Syndergaard is a primary DH. Also, Jake Arrieta is a primary DH, but he can also play first base. So I wanted to include DH for players like that. Obviously, if you're DHing the best cards, and if you have a team of the best cards in the game, then your DH is probably going to be somebody that's really good and can play the position anyway, but that's not for everybody. So a little bit of a sidetrack there, but let's get back to it. Corey Seager, I think probably A tier, just because you're going to have so many lefty at-bats against John Donaldson and Randy Johnson, and then however many other good lefties your opponent decides to pitch, be it Charlie Blackmon or Riley Green or Brooks Raley or any of those guys out the bullpen. Corey Seager's a lock to probably see a lefty 3 out of his 4 or 5 at-bats. It's just how it's going to be, so you got to kind of factor that in. This Seager card also can only play shortstop, where he is, I would say, an average defender, not plus, not bad. He has a gold shield with halfway decent reaction. He's just kind of slow, but the swing is top tier. So if you traditionally really enjoy those Seager swings, you can't really cheese this one at like second base or third base like you could with the live series. So he's either a shortstop or a DH. I will objectively rank him more as a shortstop. So I think he kind of falls into that A tier. Biggio, I really do want to put in the S tier. I think I'm going to put him in the S tier just because if you ask me to make a God squad right now with no team boost, I think he would probably be my second baseman. Absolutely love the swing. The power is a little bit unfortunate at times. You do line out quite a bit. You hit a lot of line drives with him because he's more of a contact hitter. But the speed's really nice. The fielding's really nice. And his swing is plus. So I think that easily qualifies him for that S tier, where he is one of, if not the best option at second base. This Dansby just goes into the C tier, goes into this kind of dated tier. cards that objectively you can still use them. You can still win games online with them. And if you feel really good with their swing, then you can probably still perform at a decent level with them. But they're not really towards the top of their position. Dante, another guy where that DH tier was basically made just for him. Awesome bat. Some people like the swing, some people don't, but objectively, statistically, he's always one of the better hitters in game. Has first pitch, dead red, and breaking ball, pretty much all of the quirks I look for, and he's almost a max out hitter. The power versus right isn't insane, but he's almost a max out hitter with some poor defense. I think he probably qualifies as a DH at this point in the season. So another guy I would consider DHing. David Wright, this is a relatively easy S tier at third base, very similar to like that Adrian Beltre that we got last season, where statistically you can't really ask for too much more out of a card. He has almost perfect contact, really high power left, and relatively decent power right. That probably is enough of a split to where maybe he's a contact hitter and maybe does line out a little more. Or maybe he's balanced, but overall, you probably won't notice it. He should be an absolute stud, 120 clutch. More or less maxed out fielding. The reaction doesn't matter as much at third base if you are... Yeah, so this doesn't have shortstop like the Kaiju one we got last year. So at third base, I think defensively, this is basically as good of a third baseman as you're going to get. The caveat is if you kind of like those swings, he has like a Derek Jeter-esque swing where he kind of turns the knee in and does a toe tap. So if you enjoy those swings traditionally, you'll probably really enjoy David Wright. Me personally, not my favorite card in the world, but objectively, statistically, he's a S tier card. Freddie, we kind of already went over it. This is just a worse version of that Buck O'Neil. I don't think I'm personally running this card. 80, 111, 78, 102. So he can hit righties at a respectable clip. It's not great, but against lefties, he's basically useless. So I think, in my opinion, this is a platoon card. This is probably our first F tier card. I'm just saying, like, in a competitive aspect, nobody's picking this card. If you want to use him because he's your favorite player, you can definitely do that. But if you ask me to play for money or something, would not bring him out. Hank Aaron at first base. Absolute S tier option, almost a perfect hitter. And if you like that Buck O'Neil defense speed combo at first base, Hank gives it to you with, in my opinion, a better swing, better hitting, a better hitting profile. He actually hits for power. He also has some very nice quirks in first pitch, dead red, and breaking ball. So Hank would be my pick at first base. If you do not enjoy this card right here, Lou Gehrig, we'll just kind of cheat because they're basically the same player, right? Lou is a little worse defensively, a little bit slower, but overall, I think most people consensus would be that Lou Gehrig has a better swing. The downside is that he's a lefty. You're going to have those kind of rough at-bats against Randy Johnson, against John Donaldson, where they're just tunneling up and in, four seams on you, spamming away sliders if you're on Hall of Famer Legends, shrinking your PCI a ridiculous amount. So if you don't want to deal with that, Hank Aaron. If you do really enjoy Lou and his swing, then he is just as good of an option at first base as everybody else. Reminds me of two guys we need to add here. We need to add Ernie, and we need to add Babe. We're not going to rank them yet, but we'll get to them. Hunter Green, objectively, his swing's pretty good. Statistically, not the best card in the world. I kind of have a warped perspective of him being on the O'Neil boost, which he's not. So 102, 90, 100, 92, 103 clutch. Like I said, he's similar to like those Team Affinity cards. I think he's probably dated at this point, but he's also kind of similar to like Rizzo, where he probably is a step above these guys. I think he's still usable. If you really enjoy the card and you like that Mark Canha swing that he has, then he's definitely still a usable card. Jackie, S tier with Biggio. They're basically the same card. It's more so just kind of whose swing do you like more? I way prefer Craig Biggio's swing, but I can't deny that Jackie also usually has a very good swing also. Grominator. Probably a B tier card. Realistically, I think he's more. You can run him at second, you can run him at third. I think for me, if I really wanted to get this card in, if he was one of my favorite cards of the season and I hit really good with him, I would DH his card. I think defensively, he's absolutely brutal, but I can't argue with the hitting stats. I think he's probably bottom of A tier. If you have grown comfortable with this card, if you've put some parallels on him, if you enjoy that, I think it's Travis Janikowski swing, then he is absolutely phenomenal. You can't go wrong with him. I think I'm going to be generous and put him in A tier, and you can make the argument that his offense at second base will make up for the errors that he's inevitably going to make. Here's Arrieta. So has first base, also has DH. I think I'll probably rank him as a first baseman, because if I was going to use him, it probably would be as a first baseman. I think he's probably dated, not as dated as these guys. He's kind of adjusted to being like a DH or a first baseman, where his hitting stats are actually pretty good, but the fielding and the speed's relatively bad. The reason that he's B tier and maybe sneaking into A tier is he has Jorge Soler swing. It's always a community favorite swing. It is a very, very good swing, and Jake Arrieta has that. So if you haven't used him and you really enjoy that Jorge Soler swing, you can't go wrong with using him, maybe even as like a pinch hitter off the bench. Doesn't get like the nail boost or anything, but 125 contact left, 92 power left, and max out clutch. So as a DH or as a pinch hitter against lefties, can't really go wrong with him. Really good swing. Noel here, probably top of B tier. Objectively, don't love his swing, but when you look at these stats, he's a right fielder, so his overall is catered to being a right fielder, which means SDS got away with giving him some ridiculous hitting stats for a 96, 114, 90, 125, 117, 101 clutch. He's a relatively decent fielder for a first baseman. So if you're running Jansky Noel, I'm not 100% sure on the pronunciation. Haven't watched too many Guardians games, but he's an absolute stud at first base. And honestly, if you want to make the argument for A tier, I would hear it out, but I think the swing's a little too funky, and a lot of people aren't just going to be able to pick him up and just rake with him. This Joe Torre, for the time he's came out, probably not as good as that Team Affinity one that we had. 120, 106, 105, 90, 122 clutch, decent fielding. As a catcher, he's a very good option. He's a little more contact focused than a lot of the other guys. But if you want to run this Joe Torre card because the Team Affinity one was him, I do not blame you whatsoever. I think he is a very acceptable option to run at third base. I believe he has first base and he has catcher. So at any of those spots, I think he's decent enough. Probably not a DH just because he doesn't really have the power you'd look for in a DH, but he's still a very good option there. This Heim card, a little dated. The only real argument I would be able to hear out for still using him is you just want a switch hitter. It's kind of that Bob Gibson argument. I think you kind of have that with Jonah Heim. Has really high clutch, but is lackluster against one side enough to where I probably wouldn't consider running him. This Abreu card looks insane. He's arguably knocking on the door with like Hank Aaron and Lou Gehrig. The problem is just this contact left is a little bit low. You will have the hand in this advantage if you are facing a lefty, so it offsets it a little bit, but it's still not perfect. 102, 120, 119, 121, 119 clutch. If you enjoyed that Team Affinity Jose Abreu earlier in the year, this is your guy. He's going to be absolutely elite. MVP Jose Abreu. This Kinley card, I think, he's definitely who I was alluding to earlier, where I liked him more than these two guys. But the glaring issue with him is the power. I've used him without the O'Neill Cruz boost, and I've used him with it. He's a million times better with it, but he's still very good without it. Has that Jorge Polanco swing, has some relatively good quirks, I believe, if I remember right. And the contact and the clutch is relatively good. 111, 112, 112. The problem is the power. The power is really bad. Does have good quirks, does have a good swing. Can definitely play, but not one of the top tier options at this point. Chris Bryant, one of my favorite players in real life, but not really that guy in game. So I think swing wise, you could easily argue like B or A tier. But just there's one number that just kills him. 102, 98, 111, 104. You might be thinking to yourself, that's kind of similar to Barry Larkin. That's not too bad. But then he could come down to the clutch, and this makes him easily usable on All-Star. If you're on All-Star, you can use this card. He's going to give you what you want. But it's going to make him hard to use on Hall of Fame. And then on Legend, it's not even a thought. So for that reason, I think I probably prefer all of these guys in the tier above him over him. Kristen, I want to say. Campbell looks like a stud. His swing looks a lot like Mookie Betts right here. I'm not sure if it is like that because I haven't earned the card. Like I said, he just came out. But he looks like an absolute stud. He's probably not S tier. I think Craig and Jackie are probably better than him because he is a second baseman. But if he has like Mookie Betts swing, or like if you value the fact that he has this amount of positional versatility, then he should be an absolute stud. 125, 125, 88, 96. So power that is similar to like Biggio and Jackie. Maxed out clutch. The fielding's not really up to par with those other two, and the speed's not quite as high. But he looks like an absolute stud, and I believe he gets the cruise boost, if I'm not too mistaken. He doesn't. He barely misses it. So Carson Williams should get it. Christian Campbell does not. Cutter Crawford, another affinity card that goes really well on the O'Neal boost. At this point, I think he's outdated if you are running him without the cruise boost. Just not one of my favorite cards. He has the Mookie Betts swing. You're going to hit a lot of perfects, but those are probably going to be your only hits because otherwise he just hits, he swings a pool noodle. He can't hit his way out of a paper bag, and whatever other euphemism you'd like to use to describe him. He just doesn't hit the ball hard, and it's that simple. Great swing, decent enough defensively, just not really hanging with some of the big dogs that we've gotten recently. Kyle Schwarber, kind of the opposite of like Buck O'Neal, where doesn't have some of the contact you'd probably want for like an S tier option, but the power's there, the clutch is there, the swing is there. If you traditionally really enjoy Kyle Schwarber cards, I can definitely see an argument for him being towards the top, but I don't see any argument for him being better than Lou Gehrig or better than Hank Aaron. But still a really good card. And if you wanted to DH him, if you wanted to argue for him to be a DH, you could definitely do that. Lance Lynn is really bad in the field. He's not a very good defensive first baseman, but like I said, first base doesn't really matter. If I'm grading Jake Arrieta as a first baseman, then Lance Lynn should probably also be one. 62 fielding, 25 speed is brutal, but he is a switch hitter with 105, 96, 111, 104 with 102 clutch. So like Barry Larkin caliber of hitting stats on a switch hitter at a position that usually doesn't have a lot of switch hitters. Or if you want to DH him, that's another easy way to get a switch into your lineup. Right here, we got Logan Driscoll. I include him because he's one of the only catcher options at this point. There's not a ton of depth at that catcher position. I think you can get away with using this guy. 102, 118, 65, 87, 114 clutch. Decent enough defensively. Slow as a turtle. I think if you want to make the argument that you like having the higher contact over some of these other guys, then you definitely can. I think I definitely prefer the other three catchers in this tier over him. But if you want to make the argument, I wouldn't be super against it. Luis Angel, I think he goes in this F tier. I include him here because I'm sure we all used that Team Affinity one earlier in the year. And you know his swing is absolute butter. It's just like his brothers. 102, 107, 60, 78. For me, the power is just too low when you have free options like Biggio and Jackie that pretty much everybody already has. Really no point to go back and use them. Mark Vientos, decent enough option. He might even be bottom of A tier. It's a fine card. I believe he has one hole in his game, if I remember. 106, 118, 103, 125. So really none. With the bat, he's basically perfect. Defensively, not the greatest player in the world, but the bat is phenomenal on this card. And he can hang with pretty much every other third baseman. Matt Carpenter, maybe more of like a DH, but he's also really good at second base. He's basically second base Kyle Schwarber. Always has a really good swing. Also has first base, third base, and an outfield spot. So there's almost no reason to not have Matt Carpenter in your lineup, except for the fact that the power numbers aren't that crazy. This is not Yankees Matt Carpenter. This is not Padres Matt Carpenter. This is like early St. Louis Matt Carpenter, where he didn't just hit home runs every single at bat. So the contact's higher, the clutch is higher, should be good for Hall of Fame and legend. It's just not really the Matt Carpenter that we probably want to get, but he still has an absolutely top tier elite swing. Michael Busch, I believe this guy is physically incapable of hitting the ball out if a lefty's pitching to him. Yeah, so 72 power left. He's perfect against righties. And he's still got really good contact against lefties, but 72 power left makes him a hard start. He's basically a platoon option in my eyes at that point. So if you want to get a righty that smacks lefties around and platoon the two, you can definitely do that. But I wouldn't just run him out there blindly and have him face Randy and John every other game. This Mike Schmidt, if you can stomach the swing, not a terrible card. 117, 100, 125, 120, crazy power, 110 clutch, very good fielding. He's not super slow. Has dead red, has breaking ball, the two most important quirks. Plays first, plays shortstop. So you can definitely work him into your lineup. It's just kind of if you like the swing or not. Me, I think he always has kind of a really bad swing, but overall, not the worst card in the world. Definitely usable. This Trout, I think, has dropped. If you still are using him and you're on All-Star Hall of Fame, no real issue with that. If you're on Legend, this card is probably going to sell you some games. He's probably going to get some insanely small PCIs. But the upside of that is why he's still clinging to relevancy in the B tier. It's a swing. That Mike Trout swing is just so butter. It's so amazing every single year. And it just absolutely carries this card and makes it usable, even though statistically, probably not the best option. Mitch Garver, S tier. Actually not my favorite swing in the world. I'm not on the Mitch Garver swing train like a lot of people are. But when you look at this card statistically, he's basically like a Mike Napoli clone. 125, 102, 125, 125, 125. He's very similar to like a Mike Napoli or a Mike Piazza, where it's just a catcher that's going to absolutely mash. And that's what Mitch Garver does for you. Should go crazy in like the John and Randy meta if he's getting a lefty every game. Nolan Ryan, decent enough. For me, if you're using Nolan Ryan this late into this season, it's for the swing. You really like that Posada swing. Statistically, he's fine. 100 average contact, 87 average power. Just not towards those top end options at first base, but you can't really go wrong with him. Also, he's not a bad card. Does get a lot better on the O'Neill boost, but again, like I said, we're not really factoring that in. Ozzie Smith, easiest F tier I've ever done in my life. Yes, he is a switch hitter. Yes, his defense is crazy. But when a card has 80 power left, not terrible. Should make the O'Neill boost too. Does have 96 arm. So he does make the O'Neill boost. The problem is 54 power right. That's hard to salvage. If you're ranking him with the boost, he's honestly pretty usable being a switch hitter or whatnot. But his quirks aren't great, and the power is just absolutely in the toilet. His clutch is also significantly higher than his contact, so it doesn't even really help him be an elite contact hitter. I can be generous. I can be generous for the Ozzie Smith fan club and put him in C tier. But without that cruise boost, you're just going to be sitting up there hitting lineouts constantly. Paul O'Neill, this is a DH. He is a outfielder without an infield secondary, so he's just a pure DH. I think he's just kind of too bad in the field to be running at this point. So if you're going to use him, it's going to be as a DH. Another Paul here, Paul Skeens, was by far my least favorite of the Team Infinity catchers when I used him. But he's not terrible. 125 left, 107 right, 81 power left, 84 power right, 125 clutch. So relatively, his hitting stats are actually pretty good. But I'm not a huge fan of the swing. He has some uncomfortable righty at bats. But if you can make it work, then I think he probably is a cut above like Harper and Gibson. River Ryan, very similar to like Ozzie Smith. He's Ozzie Smith if he had slightly more power and wasn't a switch hitter. 73, 69. Another guy that kind of needs that O'Neill boost, and if you give it to him, he's going to be pretty crazy. Not top tier, but it brings a bottom of the meta card into a very usable card. I think that's kind of what Captain Boost should do at their core. I think River Ryan is a pretty good example of that. This Ohtani, easy DH inclusion. Not a huge fan of the swing personally, but again, you look at this card and statistically, he's just perfect, basically. 103, 119. So the contact left is kind of low, but the power will make up for it. He's going to be a power hitter, especially against lefties. He's going to uppercut the ball. He's just going to evaporate baseballs, send them into the stratosphere. Dead red, breaking ball, unfazed are the main hitting quirks. And if you've used an Ohtani, you know that the swing can be a little janky at times, especially lefty-lefty, but he just absolutely obliterates baseballs. Thomas Sagassi, I think is how I want to say that. I'm not sure if it's 100% accurate. Looks like a Matt Carpenter clone with the no batting gloves and the Cardinals. 105, 112, 103, 98 with 106 clutch and halfway decent fielding. So not a bad card at all. Plays a lot of good different positions. I don't think he's knocking on this A tier, but I think he's firmly a B tier card if you want to use him, or if you need to use Topps Nows to kind of catch up and knock out some of those programs. I think you can definitely do that with him. This Tommy Edman might be the best Tommy Edman we've ever gotten. 125, 100, 125, 92, 125 clutch. Also, very good fielding, not insane arm strength, and not the fastest guy in the world. But at second base, he'd be elite. At third, he'd be elite. At short, probably not because of the arm strength, but in a corner outfield spot especially, he looks like an absolute stud. Can't go wrong with this card. Trevor Hoffman, on the other hand, not my favorite card in the world. Very similar to like River Ryan, where you give him the O'Neill boost, goes crazy. Looks like an insane card. Without the boost, he's just kind of whatever. 125, 108, so a good high contact option, but then 90 power left, 76 power right, kind of similar to like a Jeter from last season. And then max out clutch, decent enough fielding, somewhat fast. It just kind of comes up to if you have this card, because he was an event reward, so not a ton of people do have him. But it's how much you like the swing and if you can tolerate the fact that you're going to line out more than average. Tristan looks fine. Would not be one of my first picks. He's a good little starter card. If you're getting back on the game after a while and you want to run some ranked games and you know you're going to be on All-Star, or if you're just somebody that plays on All-Star routinely, can't go wrong with this card. 88, 100, 115, 125, 101 clutch. Should absolutely rake, but when you get to those higher divisions against pitchers that have higher hits, he's probably going to struggle, especially lefty-lefty. Percival, don't really have an opinion on this card. Never personally used him. Looks fine on paper. It's Troy Percival. So I'm going to assume that he kind of gave him a janky swing. 118, 104, 92, 78. So the power, again, a little lackluster. Kind of similar to like Trevor Hoffman, but at catcher. So not my favorite card in the world there. Willy Adames, just no reason to use him at this point. I think he's just too bad against one side. And swing is kind of janky. It's not for everybody. I've had days where I hit really good with Willy Adames. I've had days where I can't touch the ball with Willy Adames. So I think when you combine that kind of janky swing with not having the best stats, it's a good recipe for a card that nobody should be using at this point. Yenier Diaz, I think he's fine. If you want to use him at catcher, you can. I think Skeens is probably better. I think Kinley's probably better, but 101, 106, 105, 74, relatively good and well-rounded other than the power against that one side. But in general, pretty decent card there. Greinke, I believe he can play catcher, which is probably where his best value is. Yeah, so he can play catcher or second base, but statistically, I think this card's just kind of so lackluster that I can't really see why you would use it at this point. He's just like 90-90 across the board, power and contact wise, which is honestly low for this point unless you're on All-Star, and you can't really make the contact argument for higher difficulties for him. So I don't really see why anybody would be using Greinke at this point other than to farm PXP to try to knock out Team Infinity. Zach Wheeler DH card. If I was to order these DHs, I would probably go something like that. Not a huge fan of Syndergaard or Wheeler, but at least for Syndergaard, you can kind of make the all-star home run derby argument where he just has such insane power that he's going to hit a ton of nukes anyway. Wheeler just looks like a very underwhelming card in my opinion. Ernie Banks, easy S tier here. Just kind of depends on how much you like his swing. Does have a tendency to get jammed righty-righty, but in general, statistically, almost a perfect shortstop. And then the Bambino, very, very similar to Lou Gehrig. If you're just now getting Lou Gehrig and you haven't locked in Babe Ruth all year, that will probably give you a good idea of what you've been missing out on, because Babe is him, but Lou Gehrig is him Jr. He is very similar. He is 99% of what Babe is. So very good little dynamic duo there with the Yankees. If you want to play Babe in the outfield, Gehrig on first, or just Gehrig on first and Babe at DH. Not a bad option, but that is the tier list. Link will be down in the description if you'd like to review it. And just kind of go over some of these guys. Maybe in the future, I should just call this F tier, maybe like unusable, and put the DHs at the bottom, but D for DH seemed kind of appropriate. Till next time, peace.